The text sent at 11:43 on a Wednesday night. Not because I planned it. Or, that is not entirely accurate. I had written those words myself 3 weeks earlier, typed them into a draft I never sent because I didn't know what to do with them once they existed. What I hadn't planned was for my phone to decide, while I was supposedly clearing old messages with the screen brightness all the way down. That now was the appropriate moment to act on 3 weeks of inaction. The 3 dots appeared 17 seconds later. She was awake. She was reading it. I set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again. Then her reply came through. I read it twice before I was sure I'd understood it. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor, not something I do with any regularity, and held the phone in both hands and stared at the ceiling for what felt like the appropriate response to the information. I had sent Iris Wren a text that said, "I miss you." And she had sent back, "I almost sent that exact same text 3 weeks ago." My name is Owen Marsh. I'm 32. I do technical documentation for a civil engineering firm. I translate complicated technical information into language that ordinary people can understand and act on. I find the gap between what something is and how to explain it, and I fill it. I'm precise about words for a living. I use the correct ones. I am, professionally speaking, a man who does not accidentally send things. I live in a first-floor flat in a converted Victorian building in Leeds, 6 units, a shared landing, a narrow internal courtyard that the estate agent had described as a communal garden feature and that in practice is 4 square meters of flagstone and a single potted olive tree that nobody waters. I moved in 18 months ago. I own a good coffee maker, a bad television, and a bookshelf I assembled myself and have never fully trusted since. Iris Wren lives directly across the courtyard. She's 29. She does literary translation, novels, mostly, French and Italian into English, which means she works from home, keeps odd hours, and has the focused expression of someone making a decision that cannot be hurried. She has dark hair and a habit of tucking one side of it behind her ear when she's concentrating, and untucking it when she's figured something out. I know this because I can see her desk from my kitchen window if the light is right, which it often is, because we are 4 meters apart, and neither of us has put up curtains sufficient to prevent it. She had a string of small lights strung across her window frame. She turned them on every evening around 6:30. I had, over 18 months, learned to time them the way you learn the sounds of a building you've lived in long enough. The boiler cycling on, the couple upstairs walking their particular route from bedroom to kitchen to bathroom, the lights at 6:30 across the courtyard. We had become friends in the way neighbors become friends in buildings where the shared landing is narrow and the post boxes are side by side and someone has to be the one to knock when a parcel won't fit through the door. She knocked first. I happened to have the kettle on. She stayed 40 minutes, and we talked about the building, and then the olive tree, and then something else entirely. And when she left, she said thanks for the tea in the tone of someone who expects to come back soon. She was. Over the following months, she became the fixture of what I loosely call my social life. We texted about the building's erratic heating. We started going to the Saturday market at the same time because we kept running into each other anyway, and eventually just agreed to go together because the coincidence had stopped being plausible. She brought things over when she'd cooked too much. I fixed her kitchen drawer when it came off its rail. She made me dinner in return, which was significantly better than the drawer fix, and I told her so. She was the person I texted when something absurd happened at work. She was the first person I thought to tell when something went well. She would leave books at my door with the easy confidence that I would enjoy them, and she was almost always right, and she knew she was right. and I appreciated both of those things more than was probably sensible. That is how she became the top contact in my Messages app. That is the relevant, technical detail. The draft had been sitting in my unsent messages for 23 days. I want to be precise about this. I had typed those words on a Sunday evening after she had been at mine for 4 hours, not unusual, and had left at 9:30, which was also not unusual. I had stood in my kitchen for several minutes thinking about the specific quality of her absence. The way the flat went from one kind of thing to another kind of thing entirely when she left it, the particular silence that had a shape. I had picked up my phone and typed "I miss you" into a draft. And then I had not sent it. Because I am a precise person, and I knew what those words meant, and I didn't know what to do with the knowing. I opened the draft 17 times in the 23 days that followed. I read it, reconsidered, and closed it without sending. On the 24th day, at 11:43 at night, my phone decided for me. I was clearing old voice memos and must have navigated into the drafts folder without tracking it, and must have tapped send on something I was going to delete. I know this because it is the only sequence of events that produces the outcome. What it doesn't explain is why I had typed those words in the first place. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. I watched them. Then her reply came through. I almost sent that exact same text 3 weeks ago. I sat down on the floor. This seemed like the appropriate response to the information. I had known I was in trouble with Iris Wren since a specific and dateable Thursday in October, 4 months before the text. She had come over with a translation problem, a passage she was stuck on, a phrase with no clean English equivalent. One of those problems that is really a philosophical problem in a linguistic disguise. She didn't need me to speak French. She needed someone to listen while she thought out loud, which is a different kind of useful, and she had apparently decided at some point that I was reliable for it. We sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. She had the book and a notebook and a pen, and she talked and crossed things out and talked again, and I asked questions that might help, and occasionally made suggestions she would consider carefully before rejecting, which she did with a precision that was exactly what the problem required. At some point she found what she was looking for. I could tell because she went very still, and then wrote it down fast before it could leave. She looked up and said, "That's it," in the tone of someone who has been searching for something and is slightly surprised it actually exists. I looked at her face in that moment and thought, I could watch that happen every day. And then I thought, that is a significant thought. You should put it somewhere appropriate. I am a man who finds gaps and fills them professionally. This was a gap I had decided firmly to leave alone. I have poor instincts around women who find the exact right word for things. The problem with leaving a gap alone is that it knows it's there. In November, she knocked at 7 because she'd locked herself out, and the letting agency's emergency line was, she said, predictably useless in the way that suggests they planned it. I made her dinner while she waited for the locksmith. She sat at my kitchen counter, and we talked for 3 hours. Not about anything with urgency, not with any agenda, just in the way you talk when you are in the right room with the right person and there is no real reason to stop. At some point, the lights across the courtyard came on, triggered by the timer she'd set. She looked out at them and said, "I always forget I've set it when I'm in here. Strange to see them from this side." I looked at the lights in her window from my side of the courtyard. I thought, that is exactly it. That is exactly what it feels like when she goes home, and I'm left here looking at her window instead of being near it. I did not say this. I handed her the pasta. In December, I arrived at the Saturday market to find her already there, earlier than we'd said, holding a coffee, slightly embarrassed about it in a way I found disproportionately endearing. We walked the stalls for 2 hours, longer than either of us usually stayed, and bought things we hadn't planned to. On the way back, she said, "I always spend more when I come with you," in the mild tone of someone who is not actually complaining. I said, "Blame my poor influence." She said, "I do," and laughed once, briefly, in a way that was warmer than the complaint required. That got me somewhere I didn't have clearance to go. I managed it. I was managing everything. In January, she appeared at my door on a Sunday morning with my spare key in her hand. "The postman rang me by mistake," she said. "I took in your parcel." She held up the key. "I should probably give this back." "You could keep it," I said, "in case I lock myself out." She looked at the key for a moment. Then she put it in her coat pocket. "Okay," she said, simply, and went back across the landing. I stood in my doorway for several seconds after she'd gone and thought about the kind of thing a person keeps. I thought. She held it for 2 days before she came to return it. I filed that in the appropriate place. The final piece of evidence, the one I'd tried hardest not to treat as evidence, came 2 weeks before the text. She had been at mine on a Friday evening. Wine. Something on television neither of us was really watching, and when she stood to leave, she had stood in the doorway in her coat for a moment longer than leaving actually required. Not doing anything. Just standing there with her hand resting on the frame. I had looked at her from the sofa. She said, "Same time next week?" "I'll be here," I said. She nodded, like that settled something, and went. I sat on the sofa after and thought about the pause. I thought about what a precise person would reasonably conclude from a pause like that, the timing of it, the way she'd said the question, the small deliberateness of the nod. I filed the conclusion in the appropriate place and went to bed. 1 week later, I wrote the draft. 1 week after that, the phone sent it. I got up off the kitchen floor. I read her reply again. I almost sent that exact same text 3 weeks ago. There is a category of information that reorganizes everything around it. Not because it changes what happened, but because it recontextualizes what the things that happened meant. The October evening, and the exact right phrase. The lights from the wrong side. The key she put in her pocket. The doorway. The pause. "Same time next week," said in a tone that was asking something more than that question. She was a translator. She spent her days finding the correct word for a thing when the obvious translation wasn't quite right, when the meaning was more specific than the language gave you, and you had to sit with it until you found the phrase that held all of it, without losing any of it. She had found it 3 weeks before I had. She had just left it in a draft. I stood in my kitchen and I looked out at the courtyard. The lights in her window were still on. She was still awake. She was somewhere in that flat, 4 meters away, with the same text on her phone that I had on mine, and we both knew what we knew now, and the distance between knowing and doing was 4 meters of flagstone and 1 door. I thought about what to text back. I went through several things. None of them were the right container for this. I put my shoes on. I crossed the landing. I knocked on her door. She opened it almost immediately. She was in the oversized dark green jumper she wore when she was working late, sleeves slightly too long, her hair half up in the way it went when she was trying to keep it back and losing the negotiation. She was holding her phone. She had clearly been looking at our conversation when I knocked. She looked at me. I said, "I know texting back would have been the normal. I'm glad you knocked," she said. She stepped back. I came in. Her flat was warm and book cluttered in the way that means someone actually lives there. References stacked on the windowsill. The string of lights across the window, giving the room the warmth they always gave it from the outside. Different now that I was inside it. a mug on the desk with a pen tucked in it. The book she was translating was face down on the sofa, holding its page. She turned to face me. She was standing very straight in the way she stood when she was holding something carefully. I said, "I want to be honest about what happened. The text, I had written it 3 weeks ago and hadn't sent it because I didn't know if I should. My phone sent it without consulting me, which is an accurate summary," she said. Not the worst outcome, in retrospect. No, something settled in her expression. Not the worst. I said 3 weeks ago. She understood what I was asking. I was sitting in your kitchen. You were making tea. You turned around to hand me the mug and said something I don't even remember what. Something ordinary, and I thought, I am going to miss this when it's over. And then I thought, it's not over. Her fingers tightened once around her sleeve. I wanted it to be more than what it was. That landed somewhere precise. I said, you could still send it. The original. If you want the record to show you got there first. The smallest real smile from her. I think the record is already complicated. I said, I want you to know you can tell me this landed wrong if what you sent back was acknowledgement and not, Owen, an invitation, Owen. She looked at me steadily. I set that timer 6 months ago so the lights would come on in the evenings. I thought it would make the flat feel warmer when I was working late. A pause. 3 months ago I realized I'd started thinking of them as something that meant someone was home, and the direction had changed. I wasn't thinking of my own flat anymore. I held very still. I was thinking of your window, she said. Something settled in my chest. Not dramatically. Just into the position it had been trying to reach for months. I took a step toward her. She didn't move back. I reached up and pushed the strand of hair that had come loose back behind her ear, carefully, because it was something I had wanted to do for longer than I'd admitted, and she held still and let me. Then she said quietly, the phrase I couldn't translate. In October. I remember. L'esprit de l'escalier. She looked at me. The perfect thing you think of to say on the way home, when it's already too late to say it. I know what it means. I don't think I was stuck on the translation, she said. I think I was stuck on something else. I leaned forward and kissed her, and she kissed me back like she'd already decided she was going to. Her hands found the front of my shirt, and the lights were on across the courtyard, and the book on the sofa was losing its page, and none of it mattered. Then her phone rang on the desk. She pulled back and looked at it. My mother. At midnight. She works late. She looked at me. She's going to ask how I am. I'm going to say good. She's going to know something is different. And I'm going to have a whole separate conversation tomorrow. Answer it, I said. Don't leave, she said. I live across the courtyard. She answered. I picked the book up from the sofa, found the page she'd been on, and put it back face up. 3 weeks later, she found the phrase she'd been stuck on. Found it mid-dinner, mid-sentence. Stopped and wrote it on the paper envelope she had in her pocket. She showed it to me. I told her I wasn't sure that was quite the right container for the meaning. She looked at me the way she looked at translations under review. Then she said I was probably right. We argued about it for an hour. She found a better version by the end of it, and I said that's the one, and she said I know in the tone she used when she'd already known, and was seeing how long it would take me to get there. She dedicated the finished translation 8 months later to O.M., who asks the right questions. I told her it was embarrassing. She said I could take it up with her editor. A year after the Wednesday night text, she moved the lights from her window to mine. Not symbolically. She moved them because my kitchen window faces east, and gets less direct afternoon sun, which she said was better for the bulbs. She reprogrammed the timer herself. They come on every evening at 6:30. Above my window now. I can't see them from across the courtyard anymore, because I'm usually in the flat when they come on. I've come to think of that as the point. The spare key she put in her coat pocket in January still lives there. I have hers on my key ring. Neither of us made a formal decision about either of these things. They migrated the way the real things do, without announcement, without a moment you can point to as the turn. Years later, when people ask about the text, she tells it with better timing than I do, and I tell it more accurately. And she says I write technical documentation for a living so I can have the precise version, if that's what I want. I tell it precisely. The draft, the 23 days, the accidental send, the floor. She says that version leaves out the important part. I say the important part is that it's sent. She says the important part is that she had the draft first. We have not resolved this. I don't expect we will. The olive tree in the courtyard has 3 leaves now. Nobody waters it. We have both decided this is impressive.